Hey everyone, Joshua Gibson here, and you're listening to episode 63 of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. Before we begin, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the show's sponsor, BarShield. BarShield created a maintenance kit designed to prevent rust and restore spin to a barbell's sleeves. My discount code, PWPodcast, will get you 10% off of your entire purchase. It will also help me to continue producing great podcasts with amazing guests. Head over to barshieldUSA.com, pick up a kit, and get your bars looking and spinning like new. That's it for the intro. Now let's get on to this week's podcast with Jilly Jaworske. And we are live. Joshua Gibson here with yet another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. Episode 63. I never thought that I'd make it this far. And the only reason I have is because I've had people like Jilly come on for multiple episodes. So this is her fourth appearance. Jilly, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here.
It's funny. One of the athletes I actually train or coach, she loves you. Like, she's listened to all those podcasts and she like quotes you, and it's kind of interesting hearing her talk about like your thoughts on Twinkies and bricks and all of that stuff.
It's so funny. I mean, it's interesting because actually, I know we're going to be talking about AO3 today. I had a few people come up to me and they're like, hey, like I listened to that podcast that you did on the Philosophical Weightlifter. And I was like, well, which part? Like all parts, or like part one, part two, part three? And they're like, I just really liked it. I was like, well, I'm glad you like it. Like, that's awesome. And so I actually said, yeah, I'm doing another one. They're like, oh, that's great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've noticed that really anyone that I've spoken to about it just loves you and your personality. And I think that's why, in my opinion, you're as good of a coach as you are. I know we kind of discussed that before. It's just you're very honest and very open and very passionate about what you do. So as far as the American Open 3 goes, how was the meet?
You know, I was actually, and I spoke with Phil, I think, and Pedro and everyone a little bit on this, obviously not for very long because it was incredibly busy. I want to say there were like 24 sessions. I think I coached 20 or 21 of the sessions at the meet, and everyone was very pleasantly surprised with how smooth it was run, how many volunteers showed up, how many people pitched in, how many coaches went with the flow. Obviously, in every session, there's always going to be a couple coaches who have no idea what's going on, right? It's their first national meet. But I would have to say at this event, more so than some of the other series events that we've gone to, people were much more prepared. And it might be because they offered, classes beforehand and they sent out a lot of information for like first time coaches, or even like for experienced coaches, like, hey, here's what to expect. Like it's going to be crowded. It's going to be busy. There's adequate warm-up space. Like overall, it was a really well-run meet. Biggest thing was because there were so many sessions, right? There's only so many hours in a day. You dealt with some really funky times. Being in Vegas, being in the Pacific time zone, having lifters I have lifters who live out west, but I also have lifters from the East Coast and obviously Central. My lifters from the East Coast struggled big time. I mean, some of them were lifting at 11 o'clock p.m. their time. That's when the session started. That was probably the weirdest thing. And we just, we went into it with the idea like, hey, it's less than ideal, but if you ever made an international team, you're going to deal with time changes. You're going to deal with like less than ideal conditions. And so if that's like the worst thing, right, is that we had a session that started at 8:30 p.m. And we got out of there after drug testing at like 11. That's, that was pretty much the worst thing that happened. It was really well run. Yeah.
And of course, preparing for that is going to be difficult. So like the day of when they're competing is some advice kind of just drink a lot of caffeine to try and stay up at that time? Or is it change your training beforehand? Like how would you go about preparing for something like that?
So like myself personally, or preparing them for it? Because I think it's very different, right? Based on experience level. We went into this meet. Hi, buddy. We went into this meet with the understanding that it was going to be less than ideal conditions, right? So we had, I don't want to say random practice times or like random max out days, because it's never really random with us, but Brittany is our assistant coach at TSS Barbell. We did our very best to host some like late night max out sessions. And by late night, I mean, we started at like 9 p.m. because honestly, anything later than that, like I'm going to fall asleep, right? And like I have to get up the next morning. But I mean, we had the whole gym there. I mean, it was incredible. We had some of our more advanced athletes training at that time. And for my more beginner lifters, you know, they were invited to participate, right? But a lot of times those are my moms, those are my people with 9-to-5s. That is not realistic, or they have kids. Like getting childcare at that time is just not a possibility. Even they showed up to support, right? So the athletes who we expected might go later participated. And actually it was only like 2 of those athletes, right, who ended up, I don't know if you can hear. So for anybody listening, I have a French bulldog. Just side note, his name is Kilo. He has been super, super attached ever since I got back because I was gone for like a week in Vegas. He has not left my side, so I might boot him here in a second or tell him to stop snoring. But he's kind of the best. So yeah, that was great. It's like, what is that noise? Yeah, it's my dog. Like he's the gym dog. Yeah, so they ended up participating in it. We had a lot of people come out. It went really well. We had an idea, you know, from those sessions, what numbers we were roughly going to hit, like under less than ideal conditions. And they were not the same numbers that we hit at noon on Saturday, right? And they were not the same numbers that we hit at the local meets that we did leading up to the event, because that was, you know, even better conditions for most of those guys. And I say guys because we predominantly coach men, but we did have female athletes competing as well. But our more competitive athletes right now are men. And I think that has something to do with it too. You know what I mean? Like, I go back and forth, right? Like between like, do I prefer coaching men? Do I prefer coaching women? My women at AO3 all went kind of sporadically, right? Just like my men, but they're very, very adaptable. My guys really love their routine, right? And they're not moms, and maybe they're a little bit younger. They're college kids. They're UTSA students. They really didn't mind the later times, right? There were only a couple of them who really were like, yeah, I wish I would have gone a couple hours earlier. So yeah, it went well. I mean, we stuck to the plan, right? Like for training purposes, I want them to train like how they have been training. And it was only in those last 2 to 3 weeks that we really added that variable. You know, I mean, like I didn't want to start 6 weeks out like, hey guys, we're maxing out at midnight. That's just not great for recovery. Like there's still, you know, building strength, building consistency through those last 6 weeks. So the goal was to stick to the plan, also keeping in mind, right, we didn't have a finalized schedule until the day before the meet. There was a technical meeting on Tuesday. It was finalized on Wednesday because of the number of athletes. So no one really knew for sure when they were going, down to the day, right, because the days even switched. So we all flew in Tuesday night or Wednesday morning with the understanding that, hey, you could be going on a different day than we even planned. And with that, you just have to be very conservative, right? Like in your taper leading up to the meet, and also be prepared to throw in an extra day of training if you get pushed back a day.
So what does the conversation look like when you are going into a meet with less ideal circumstances? Because obviously as a newer coach, I recognize there's a need for a lot of different discussions and conversations about what we want to happen and what will happen. So right. Looking towards you as someone who's more experienced and has dealt with this more often, what does that look like when you're talking to an athlete about, hey, this may not go well, here's what to expect? And then after the fact, does it usually kind of help clear up whatever has happened, or is there still kind of like a discussion about becoming, like accepting the results?
Okay. So I think there's probably two, you know, we can divide this into 2 parts, like going into it and then the follow-up, right?
Yeah.
Going into it, we had a meeting before we even got on the plane to Vegas. We had, you know, a mandatory team meeting, and we talked about expectations, right? And I think that was probably the best thing we could have done. And we went over just like basic ground rules too, you know, like, hey, like here's what is expected at the event. Like here's the attitude that we expect in the back room. Here's what we're looking for as far as like being a teammate, what's acceptable on social media. You know, it's Vegas, right? Like do not post this, or, you know, don't wear your shirts out to the bars, things like that, like basic ground rules. And then we got to the part that it's like, hey, we have 21 athletes competing. And then I also coached a couple of Collins athletes. So I think it came out to be like 23 or 24 athletes total. I said, out of 23 or 24 athletes, inevitably one of you is going to have a really bad day, right? And I said, inevitably someone's going to have the best day of their life. Like that's just going to happen. And I said, based on how the cards fall, quite literally, right, and the attempts that are called and what time we go, all of those factors are factors we do not have total control over. So going into it, know that you can work your butt off, right? We can prepare the best we can. And even still, something could go wrong, and we have to be okay with that because there's always another meet, right? And I think when you coach, I don't even want to say like intermediate lifters, but you're not, right, maybe going for a world spot, right? You're just maybe below that level or even a little bit more below that level, right? Maybe this is your first national meet. You have to understand that like learning to compete at that level or focusing on the result so much, right, when it is important, even then it might not go right, right? We saw a lot of people, jockeying for world spots and they didn't have the best day. And if you look at how they handled themselves in the back afterwards, it's the real deal, right? They're very professional. They're very composed. They congratulate, the people who did make the team and like they move on. You look on social media, right? They're already back to training. They're already refocusing. And we use that as an example too, where like, even if you do not have a good day, we said you have 1 hour to be upset about it. You got 1 hour. You have 1 hour. You can go excuse yourself. You can walk around. You can go back to the house. You can chill out. But then after that, we move on to the next thing because inevitably someone will probably be competing after you who needs your cheering, who needs your support, who needs your help in the back room. The benefit, I think, to being on a weightlifting team, right, is that it's bigger than yourself. It's an individual sport, but we went as a team, and it's like you can put your own performance to the side and still be really proud of everyone else who's been busting their butt around you, right? Because most of our team trains together. And focus on their outcome or their result or how you can contribute to a positive experience for them. So that's how we prefaced it. And I even said, hey, I'm sure one of you is going to bomb out, right? And so everyone's like, oh no, who's going to be the one who bombs? And we didn't have any bomb outs. I think our worst athlete went 3 for 6. So we set the bar very low in the sense that we said, hey, anything could happen back there. And your job is to stay calm, stay focused, and trust that we will take care of it. Because at that point, I don't want the athlete worrying so much about what do I need to do other than lift, right? And we do our very best, right, to make sure that we have adequate loading. We have someone at the card table. We have someone on standby for food, water, caffeine, etc. All of those roles were assigned in a Google Doc a week in advance. And so we had the staff, right? We had 4 to 5 staff members per athlete so that everything else could be taken care of, eliminated, adjusted to in the moment, right, for that particular session. So the lifter could just focus on their own lifting. And that made it, I think that made all the difference, right? It's one of those things where if you have the support system around you, even if you have adverse conditions, you're able to rally and really perform.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to the AO3, but a lot of the things you kind of touched on there got my mind thinking about culture within a gym and within a weightlifting team. So I've talked to a few people, Yasha Khan in particular, and he said that the culture kind of develops itself, right? People watch each other. There are no formal rules, but everybody kind of learns how to interact with one another and treat the equipment, the people, the space, the time. How do you go about instilling culture within a gym? And I guess what kind of culture are you looking to develop?
Oh, this is such an interesting question because I was actually having this discussion with our assistant coach yesterday, right? I think if you have been in this sport long enough, right, the culture, it does start to develop itself. And I think that's a very good way of putting it. I think for newer coaches, right, and we're talking less than 5 years, or you've started a gym in the last 5 years, your job is to determine, right, like what kind of culture you are going to have in the gym. If it develops itself, it may not develop into what you want necessarily. And I think that is the downfall of a lot of newer teams. We actually have team standards, and I wish, right, that someone had very early on in weightlifting actually handed me like a pamphlet or a booklet and been like, hey, here's what's expected. Because with all of the influx of all these new athletes, right, we have a lot of athletes coming from other sports. We have a lot of athletes coming from CrossFit. We have high school athletes, right, who are young people who are developing, who maybe they haven't had, right, that formal introduction to any sport. They've just been doing it for so long. They kind of, they know the unwritten rules, but now they're transitioning sports, or they're transitioning into a privatized sport, right? Which is a little bit different because not everyone competes for USA Weightlifting in a sense that like they're being paid by USA Weightlifting, right? They're going to a private facility with its own culture. And they don't know, right? They come in and they're like, well, I'm not sure what is exactly expected. They're transitioning. Another good example, they're transitioning from another individual sport where they were on like a quote team, but it really wasn't a team, right? Like they showed up as a team, but they practiced by themselves or at home or whatnot. I hear that too. So when someone comes to us, we always have a phone call actually before they arrive at the gym. And that's just a basic screening. It's like, hey, awesome that you're into Olympic weightlifting. What are you looking for? Here's what we do. Here's what we offer. Can we get on the same page before you even arrive at the gym? And I'd say about 50% of the time, that kind of eliminates the need for a meeting. They're like, oh, hey, like that's actually not what I want at all. And then from there, I usually refer them to a facility where I feel like that would offer what they want better. So a good example is, hey, I do CrossFit. I want to clean up my lifts a little bit. Don't want to compete in Olympic weightlifting, but would like to, learn how to do a power snatch, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, like that's really cool. That's not really what we do. You can book a one-on-one session. You can see if you like it, but like if you're coming into an Olympic weightlifting facility, like we're going to focus on probably more than just power snatch, right? We're going to go into the intricacies of the lift a little bit more. And if they're like, oh, hey, whoa, that's way over my head. We have some other facilities in the area that offer both CrossFit and Olympic lifting, and their coaches are, familiar with coaching both. Whereas I don't coach CrossFit. We just coach Olympic weightlifting. I usually refer out. And I don't know how many coaches actually do that, right? I think sometimes we are very ambitious in the sense that we try to be the coach for everybody. And that just, it fucks with your culture, because when you try to be something for everyone, then you are nothing for the people who really are the ones building your culture, right? And so we started doing that when we opened our like brick and mortar facility in April. So if it does work out and they're like, no, I'm really interested in actually learning about weightlifting, like the sport of, or competing in, or, maybe I'll do a local meet. I'm like, okay, well, like, let's sit down, come on in, let's check out the facility and talk about who we are, what we do, etc. And more often than not, they come in and I really like them a lot. And then I'm like, hey, so awesome. It's really cool to hear about your background, that you want to learn the lifts. I don't care if they're beginner. I don't care if they've never touched a barbell. I don't care if they're advanced. It's always the same. I go to we have like a little nightstand, and I open my drawer and I pull up my team standards and I'm like, here they are. I was like, here it is, all laid out, all the rules. And it's not like don't walk in front of people, because that's like one of those unwritten rules that you just kind of learn as you go. It's like, we expect you to be more positive than negative every single day. We expect you to leave your bad day at the door when you walk in the facility, because we're here to train and this is not a social hour. We expect you to be modest. We expect you to wear a shirt when you train, and for, your buttocks to be covered. Okay. These are things that we have found that promote the culture, right, that we are looking for, and we don't like micromanage it, but we also don't want like shirtless girls in bras running around booty shorts, necessarily, because, right, like we're representing a brand and a team. And if you want to do that you're on your own in your garage or on your own time, like not during team training, not at a national outing, like that's fine, right? And like modesty is like a big one for us, just because we are like a men's team basically with, female athletes, but I want every athlete to be comfortable. Let me think. Some other really good ones, just if you're writing your own team standards, we have, a clause in there, what going off programming looks like. I think that's like a big one for a lot of coaches, right? Someone sees some like sexy new cycle online or some new exercise, and you've like put all this time and thought right into the program you're writing for your athlete. And they're like, oh, well, so-and-so's doing belt squats. And you're like, why are you doing belt squats in the corner? Like, that's not in your program. You're like, I wrote that program. I did not put belt squats, or, you know what I mean? We have like a whole page dedicated to what happens if you go off programming, right? And I've had people ask me, and this is so funny because like I really don't have to worry about like my people. Hey, is it okay if I walk my dog? I'm like, yes, that's like not going off programming. Like you're fine. You can go walk your dog at the park. But if it's like blatant disregard, right? Like someone maxes out, okay? That's something where we have it in there. It's like the first time it happens, we sit down, we talk about why it's happening. Why? You know, it's not like, oh, you're in trouble. It's like, hey, let's have a discussion as to why you think you needed to max out. Because I want to know. It's like, do you not trust the program? Do you not trust us? Do you not feel like you're being challenged enough? Can you not do a meet for a year? Like, what's going on, right? What was the thought process where you blatantly disregarded everything that I wrote, because this is unusual, and did what you wanted to do? And so that's like the first step. And then like the second step is then they're suspended, right? If we find out it happens again. And then we have a meeting to talk about rejoining the team and following programming. And then the third time is they're gone. And so it's clauses like this or standards like this. And I want to say we have like 15 maybe different rules or standards. I didn't just sit down one day and like come up with these arbitrarily. I would say within our first year of business, every single thing in that, list happened, right? And then all of a sudden I was like, oh crap, I really need some rules. Like I really need some clearly defined standards because when you're developing a new team or you're developing new lifters, like you as the experienced weightlifter, right, you may know all these things from training in a gym like Yasha's or training in Cal Strength or, for me, training with Colin. Like I know all these rules, right? But I can't just expect people to come in and know all these things. And that's what I've realized, right? Like weightlifting is growing at such a rapid rate that on one hand, right, like the people like ourselves who've been in this sport for a while, we're like, oh yeah, everyone should know these things. And it's just, the culture develops itself and it's so beautiful. And on the other hand, right, there's like that new age thought, hey, you're right, it will develop itself, but we're in that phase right now where there's so many new people, they really don't have a clue, and you can't freak out and you can't panic, but you got to give them a little bit of guidance, and either they get with the program or they leave. And by get with the program, I mean, it's not like I have like these super crazy strict rules, although people have definitely said that before because I actually wrote them out, right? Not everyone likes that. And I present them on the first day, kind of like school. It's like, raise your hand, right? It's just like, I'm very transparent in the sense that I'm like, these are the standards. There are no other secret standards at all. Like, this is it. This is your expectation as an athlete with TSS Barbell. That has eliminated 95% of issues. And so if for anyone who doesn't have clauses or a protocol or a set of team standards, I think that's where you start. It's almost more important than like a mission statement or like, here's what we are, right? Like a tagline, because it's so clearly defined and you can reference it at any point when you have an athlete who is below the line, and below the line meaning they're just not meeting the standards.
Yeah. And I think the beauty in that, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can appreciate the amount of thought that goes into it, because if you aren't explicitly telling people, there's always going to be that question in their head of, is this acceptable or not? Or they may not even think about it, so you can't blame them because it maybe just comes second nature. Now, as far as the exercise, like the going off the program, I don't think a lot of athletes understand the amount of thought it takes to develop a program, because you do consider all of the exercises and you do consider what place they have and what the athlete's needs are and what the trade-offs are. So when you add in an exercise at random, it's probably already been thought through that that's not what's best at this time, maybe later, but I think you kind of do a disservice to the amount of effort from the coach. Now, as far as like acute situations that kind of come up where someone goes against the code, but besides like going off of the program, what does that kind of look like that discussion?
These are all really great questions. I'm glad we're talking about this today because it's so relevant, right? It's like, what do you do when an athlete screws up?
Yeah.
I'll be the first to say that I was kind of a brat growing up. I was the problem athlete. Oh, not always, like never with actual lifting, right? It's just like I was young and I was growing up. So there are many different ways to handle it, and you have to be very careful. And especially in the world we live in now, it is not the weightlifting world that I grew up in, right? So I think as a coach, your athletes trust you implicitly, right? And breaking that trust comes in many different forms. And when an athlete is not aware, right, that they are explicitly breaking a rule and you go off, that trust is broken, right? Because often it's not related to the training. It's often like they made some offhand comment and it made 3 people uncomfortable. And then those 3 people are texting you or calling you, right, at like midnight. And every coach listening to this has been there, right? And you're like, well, fuck me. Because you're like, 1, I have 3 athletes who are uncomfortable. 2, so-and-so said it, so I have to handle it. And 3, that might be what they truly believe. And I've got to be careful how I go about this, because if, right, they just were unaware how offensive it was or what they said was inappropriate, and I'm like, hey, you're a bad person, or hey, like, you can't do that. Like, how you approach it is extremely important, because oftentimes these situations can be rectified. But if you are, like a lot of weightlifting coaches, very type A, very blunt, right? And you just dive right in and you're not asking, hey, what happened, or their side of the story, or how it happened, that athlete is done. It doesn't even matter if you think you resolved it. Within 4 to 5 weeks, they quit, they move on, they switch teams, and you're like, well, shit, because that was a really good athlete, or I had a really good working relationship with them. So and now that we're bigger, excuse me, I will say that a lot of times these things work themselves out, in the sense that I have like younger guys, and so will make an offhand comment, and I'll have one person, and they'll be like, hey, I didn't really like that. And I said, what's good if you don't like something? I said, 1, think about it. Like, why am I taking offense to it? Like, look internally. Like, why is this offensive? Do I have a valid reason? Did it offend someone else, or is it harming someone else, right? Or am I just taking it personally? And 2, if it is really, right, deeply bothering me, the best thing to do as an adult is to go handle it yourself. Well, hey, so-and-so said something offensive about, my Fleo shorts. And that really upset me, because I like Fleo shorts, right? And we say this, right? And it's funny, but it's not. This has actually happened in my gym. And I'm like, okay, all right. You like Fleo shorts. They cover your butt. You like wearing them. Makes you feel powerful. So-and-so thinks that Fleo shorts are stupid. You can either come to me and talk to 3 people about it, or you can go up to the person. We have a front office or a front room, and say, hey, I really like you as a person. I really like you as a teammate. Like, I enjoy training with you, but like, you made me really uncomfortable when you said you didn't like Fleo shorts, because I love them. And I'm like, if they make you that uncomfortable, like, I'd like to know why, right? It's like digging deeper. And this is just every organization, right? It's not just weightlifting. It's CrossFit. It's any gym, right? It's any workplace. The first thing I say is, because they are all adults, right? This is not how I would handle it with a youth athlete. I say, you go handle it first. And if they don't want to handle it, I'm like, you have to ask yourself, is it then that important that I go handle it and address it with that athlete? And then oftentimes it's not. And they get over it, and we move forward, and we refocus on why we're actually in the gym. And that's just to train and work towards our weightlifting goals, right? Now, I've had a situation where there was an athlete. We have cameras in the gym. She broke a barbell. Okay. And there were 4 other people who witnessed it. We have a policy. It's, if you break it, you buy it. And some people are like, whoa, that's really intense. Except, right, we have like all IWF equipment, and it's very expensive. And the exception to this is, if you come forward and it was an accident, then we can work something out, right? Like, either I'll replace it, or the business will replace it, or it's basically like, if you break something and put it away broken, you're buying it. Okay. Because that's not cool. Because if someone else uses that broken bar or that broken piece of equipment and gets hurt, and that's actually happened to myself, that's very serious, and that's a liability issue. And I feel like truly that's an integrity issue, right? Like, you don't care enough about your teammates to put that broken piece of equipment back. They use it, we're a 24-hour facility. Someone could get seriously hurt. So that's exactly what she did. And everyone kind of sat and watched, and I was in the front office, and she cleaned up the rest of her stuff, and then she left. And I had 4 people, all 4 people come in the front office of like, Jilly, we didn't want to say anything. We didn't want to snitch. We didn't want to be bad people. We just want you to come out and look at this barbell. And they didn't even say who did it, right? They didn't even say she broke it. They're like, can you come look at this? And I come out and look at it, and I'm like, oh shit, like, this is a brand new Eleiko bar. And I don't even know how she did it, right? It's toast. right? The end of it's like bent, like it's chipped. And I'm like, oh crap. And I was like, guys, I was like, would you feel comfortable telling me, right? Or like, who did this? Or do I have to check the cameras? I'm like, well, it was so-and-so. And like, that's what I mean by the culture kind of develops itself, but they knew, like everyone knew the rules. They knew she was out of line. Like they knew, right? Like if they broke a piece of equipment, I've had them come to me, send me photos. I'm not even at the gym, right? They're like, hey coach, I did it. It was an accident. I messed up. Like, what would you like to do? More often than not, we just replace it, right? In that situation, we had a meeting with the athlete and we talked about how this was more than just, breaking equipment. It was an integrity issue, right? And then she didn't want to replace it. She was out. She didn't apologize. She said, oh, at my CrossFit gym, all the bars, this happens all the time. Just excuses. Sometimes those character flaws show up in weird ways, right? And your culture kind of protects itself because everyone just sat there, right? No one was like, oh God, like so-and-so did this or that. They just watched. And I think that's the coolest thing about setting the tone for the gym is if and she was newer, right? She came in, everybody watched, they gave her a chance to, step up. She did it. They came forward to me. And then as the head of the organization, like, well, what are we going to do? I said, well, I'm going to talk to her about it and see what she wants to do. And if someone denies, lies, and I have to pull up video footage to show them exactly what happened, well, then of course, that's as a business owner, as a leader of an organization, that's a really good time to take a loss, right? Short term. And remove that person from the culture because you then have, if you think about it, you have 4 other people who are like, hey, this person, they're not abiding by all the rules that we've agreed to that, are for the betterment of the team, the betterment of the organization, the growth. And I also can't have people who are just breaking $1,000 barbells because as a business owner too, right? It's like I carry a $3 million policy, like an umbrella, but that might not be enough, right? If someone gets severely hurt, or I would feel terrible, right? Beyond that, if it happened, and then that would damage our entire reputation as a team. So using those guidelines too, to make those tough calls, right? Without being like the maniac coach who's like, you didn't wipe your bar, like you're out or you're suspended. You have to just act like, take a breath, refer back to the guidelines that you set forth and say, how severe is it? Can it be fixed? Is this something we can resolve one time? Or is it so severe of an infraction that person really does need to be removed from the team? And that just takes, I think, a little bit more self-awareness, right? And a little bit more thought and avoiding like the knee-jerk gut reaction, like, hey, you fucked up. And as someone who's been at the other end of that, right, with hot-headed type A coaches, like, hey, you fucked up, I can say that maybe it was something super minor, right? Like I dropped a plate on its side. I've been chewed out for that, right? And like, I don't like it when my athletes do it, but it was an accident. My hand slipped. I dropped a 10-kilo plate on its side, right? The center popped out. And I mean, it was like a scene. Okay. And I was destroyed after, right? For like weeks because like it did slip, and I didn't intentionally mean to break the plate. You have to be careful because not only does it affect that one person, right? Who is getting reamed, but everybody else who watches it no longer feels safe and they no longer feel secure. And then it's not a productive, positive training environment. So it's vague, but it's really not, you know what I mean? Like you have to use good common sense. And the more that you coach and the longer I think you run an organization and the deeper you delve into your standards, the more clearly those answers will come to you.
Yeah. And I think it is towing a fine line because as you alluded to, you don't want to make it a situation where people are afraid to just kind of be relaxed.
Right.
And kind of going with what you were saying, how did you kind of become comfortable with acting as a professional in that environment? How much do you kind of let yourself, I guess, because it's another fine line of being open with the athletes and being yourself, but then maintaining that standard. And I'm sure some situations arise where you have to maybe hold yourself back a little bit. So like, what did that development look like? And I mean, are you still working on it to this day, or do you find yourself like being really reserved or?
I mean, absolutely. Right. Like I'm trying to be my best self. And I feel like we always say that, right? Like living our best life, being our best self. Who I am at home, who I am with my significant other, who I am outside of my gym is not the same person that I am on Instagram or necessarily at the gym. My Instagram persona, our social media persona, and like, I hate to say that, but it's true, right? Like I am naturally kind of bitingly sarcastic. I have a dark sense of humor, right? I can be very, and like, this is me being honest. Like, I can have a very short fuse, right? I also can be super giggly and ridiculous, when I have a little bit of wine. Like, these are like all very real things about me. Okay. I try not to let all of that necessarily like effuse into who I am as a professional. And I think that when you start a club, I'm not saying don't be yourself. I'm saying be your best self, right? Because I have, right, not always been my best self. And this is why I'm saying that. And that can be unsettling, I guess is the best word, for some people who only know you or view you as that person on social media. And that is why they were initially maybe attracted to you or your club, right? And then they show up and you make one offhand comment who any of your friends would be like, oh yeah, that's just Jilly, right? Or, oh yeah, that's just Brittany or Josh. And they're like, well, that doesn't really fit in line with my, version of this person. Right. And, that's tricky. That's tricky, right? Because you don't want to be a poser. You don't want to be fake. You don't want to be, misrepresenting yourself, right? But you do want to be representing your best self, and everybody is human. Everyone's going to have a bad day. Everyone's going to make an occasional comment. I have gone off, right? Like, I have lost my temper. It happens. I think everybody has. Every coach has done it. Every athlete's done it. Like, we all have bad days, right? The problem is when you are your truest self all the time. I don't care what industry you work in, right? You go to your 9 to 5 and you're your freaking truest self. Your boss is going to be like, hey, dude, let's tone it down a little bit, because maybe that doesn't vibe with like our organization's culture, standards, beliefs, etc. And we understand that you fit in here, right? But like, that person is not the organization. That person is a piece of the organization. And when you're trying to develop a team or develop a culture, right? The team is not me. The team is not Brittany. It is not just my beliefs, right? Or her beliefs, or how I think weightlifting should be done. And this is a strange concept, and it's almost like letting go, but it's not. I have taken a step back personally, right? And I've stepped up professionally to move the organization forward towards the right direction, even though not everything that we do, not everything that we promote is maybe what I believe personally, right? Like, I've been called a coastal elitist snob recently, which I think is hilarious. But like, I'm very like, I love like watching elite weightlifting. Like, let's be honest, who doesn't love watching elite weightlifting? I think that we should be talking about it more. I think that's what should be glorified on social media. This is my personal belief, right? There's a lot of mediocre weightlifting on social media. And sometimes, right, like, I've been kind of quiet on social media. It's too much for me. However, right, I still believe, okay, professionally, that we should celebrate those wins for the person in J session or an E session or the 6 performance or the 4 kilo PR, despite the fact that many people who've been in the sport for a million years are like, they're not even a national level lifter. And you're right. Maybe that's your personal belief. Like, I believe, like, we should be celebrating maybe only A sessions, right? Personally. But professionally, I love all of my athletes. I'm very proud of them. I want to celebrate them on my business page, right? I'm going to highlight their performances. I'm going to highlight all the progress they made. I'm going to continue to make those posts with very high quality photos, right? And Brittany is too. But sometimes, okay, understanding that you have two different hats, right? And that there's one hat that is better fit for the growth of an organization or the growth of the sport or the growth of an athlete's development. That hat comes first, right? If you want to continue to develop, right, as a coach, develop other athletes, like grow as a person while still holding on to who you are. Because I will still always get excited when I see someone like Courtney Batchelor come back, right? And that might have been the highlight of my weekend personally. Okay, like watching my friend come back, freaking crush it, like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. But then on my professional hat, it's like, I am very proud of every single one of those athletes who stepped up and got on a national platform, and that's just as cool. Okay, and I think that's where some of the disconnect is with a lot of old school coaches, like understanding what social media is and what it's not. It's a business tool more than it is anything, and it is not always, right, who you are as a person more so than what you want to represent. as far as your team or your organization, we often assume that it is, right? And clearly defining like what the expectation is personally versus professionally, so that you can leave some of your personal, right, beliefs off to the side when you walk in the gym or when you're making a post or when you're writing a blog, while still, speaking how you would normally speak to a friend, your best friend, your best self. I think that's again, one of those lines that you walk. And the longer that I do this and the more athletes that I coach and the more influence that we have, or the more I'm interacting with coaches in the best room, I will say that there is like a coaching filter now, to where I'm like, would I say this to an athlete I just started coaching? Would I say this to a level 5 coach I just met? Would I say this to my parents, right? Like, is this something, right? Is this something I would say to the parents of my youth athlete? Is it a joke I would make? Is it a belief I would share, right? Or is this something that's maybe more reserved for my best friend who doesn't weightlift, my significant other, someone, like I don't have to put it on my Instagram story, right? Because it may offend people. Okay. While still standing for what you believe in, right? Like if you have a very strong belief, there are right ways and wrong ways to do that. So figuring that out and understanding, right? Even acknowledging that there are two separate hats, I think is the first step to transitioning from maybe that level 1 coach with 5 lifters to, hey, I'm running a legitimate business and I'm running a legitimate team. And like, I do have to act more of a professional in order to continue to have these opportunities with USA Weightlifting or with youth athletes, going to camps, coaching at national events. Like there is a step you have to take. And weightlifting, maybe was not always like that. We've seen a lot of growth. We've had a lot of the same players for the last 30 years. Everyone is growing. It's not just the sport of weightlifting. Like as coaches, as professionals, like we have to grow too.
Yeah. And just one comment on that little spiel on weightlifting and being a fan of the A session and not so much of the other sessions. The reality of it is when you get that many people at a meet, the A session can't grow, right? It's limited. So the percentage of people that are considered elite at that point gets smaller and smaller.
Yes.
And then you're saying, well, 99% of people don't deserve any credit because they're just not good enough or not able to be good enough because of whatever reasons, that are specific to them. So I think it is important, as you were saying, to kind of highlight their success and other people may not like that, but the person who you're talking about will love it. And that might help them continue on in the sport and become that A session lifter.
And that's my freaking point, right? Like I freaking love watching A sessions. I'll be honest. Those are the only ones where I really sit down and I pay attention other than my own lifters. Like, let's just be honest here for a second, because that's the best weightlifting in America. And I love that shit. Like that stuff gets me hyped as an athlete, as a coach, as a person. Like that inspires me, right? It doesn't really inspire me to go watch people bomb out in J sessions. However, right, if we're talking about athlete development, and now I've got my coach's hat back on, my athlete hat is off, right? And oftentimes coaches do not switch those hats. It's really cool to watch a B session lifter PR his lifts, like just freaking smoke it, right? And he's still 20 kilos off A session, but maybe he's 19. Maybe he's been lifting 3 years. Maybe he hasn't been lifting 8 years. Maybe, right? You celebrate that person feels really good about what they're doing and they are making progress. Like it is something worth celebrating, just like you said. And the next thing you know, 5 years later, they are in that A session, despite the fact it's even more elite, more exclusive, harder to get into. I mean, that's how we keep people in the sport. And it's a game of longevity. It's not just good technique. It's not just strength. It's building them up, right? And developing that self-efficacy and that self-belief. And in the society we currently live in, social media, right, plays a really large part in self-belief and confidence. And it's very understated. So a lot of times, I have friends that are like, oh, you post a lot of mediocre weightlifting on your TSS Barbell page. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And you know what? And Brittany posted too. They've been lifting like a year. So it's going to be very mediocre. And you know what? It keeps them excited. It keeps them interested. It's acknowledgement that they're working really hard towards their goals. And even though, like, yes, I am aware that it is not A session lifting, I still realize how important it is to their mentality, right? And the sense of belonging and the sense that they do belong at these meets. And that is what's going to push the sport forward. And that's how we're going to find the talent, develop the talent, and keep the talent. And so I think that too, it's like, yes, I'm aware. Yes, I'm aware that like, maybe it wasn't the best snatch, or that jerk needs some cleaning up. But that's just me as a business owner, and that's me as a coach. And that's like, for them, right? My biggest job, besides teaching them proper technique, besides instilling culture, is developing them as people so that they truly believe they could maybe one day, right, be on that stage. And if I know for a fact they're not going to be, right, we're talking about maybe a master's athlete, they're 40, right? My job is then to believe they can be a better weightlifter and that they can still compete at a master's level or be competitive. And maybe, right, we have revere, right, for those A-session lifters, and I'm not giving them unrealistic expectations like, hey, yeah, one day, dude, at 42, like, you're going to be out there too. No, it's like we respect and revere these performances, and you realize how difficult it is to attain because you are busting your butt to train like them, act like them, carry yourself like these individuals in the back room, and now you have a better understanding, right, of how difficult this sport is while still participating in maybe the same meet, which is really cool. And that's not just being a business owner. I think that's just being a coach, right? That's just being not even a friend. That's that honest, not even just honest, but kind voice who's like, hey, let's set a realistic goal, acknowledge when we meet the goal, and then as your coach, help you set new goals that are realistic so we can keep moving forward. And above all, that's what we stand for.
Well, the reality of it is, and I see this a lot on social media. I guess we always come back to this because it's so prevalent. But people will watch a lift, like say you post a lifter, they're not very good. They have a lot of technical faults, so they maybe jump backwards a lot, and you post a PR, and someone's like, hey, they're jumping backwards.
Yes.
I mean, there's no acknowledgement of the fact that 1, you're working on it, 2, it's a process, 3, no one's perfect. Yes. And I think that goes with even competition performances. When you watch someone lift and you're like, that was shitty, it's like, obviously they know that. They're not oblivious to the fact that that's not good. I mean, you know what good is. You watch the A-session lifters. Good lifting is obvious, right?
Right.
Proficient technique is obvious.
Right.
So I think it's kind of ignorant almost to see those things and even comment on them because it's so obvious to the coach and the athlete.
I think ignorance is just one of those things too, right? It's how we respond to it. It's not like it will ever go away, or it's not like there isn't ignorance in every aspect of the world, right? We can find ignorance we could talk about any topic and ignorance would come up. I'll leave it at that, right? So with weightlifting, right? Like you have 2 options, right? When someone is blatantly ignorant towards your lifter, your post, someone might say something negative towards you, and it's not just negative, it's just very ignorant, right? They don't know you as a person. They don't know that lifter. They don't know you as a coach. You can either react, right? And be like, hey, don't, internet coach my athlete, or back off. They have a coach, right? Which it's just a reaction, which is oftentimes what these people want, like these people being whoever made the comment. Or you can educate them and educate them politely and say, hey, in the nicest way possible, let's be a little less ignorant, right? And it might be like, hey, thank you. I also noticed that. However, if you, will look above at the caption, this was a PR attempt. Often at maximal attempts, there will still be some technical errors. And you just leave it at that. And you don't have to apologize. You don't have to explain further. It's like a little bit of knowledge, right? And not all ignorant people will continue on right after that because you weren't reactive, right? You're just like, hey, like, thanks for thanks for the love, thanks for the like, or thanks for the comment. Like, you give them a little bit, but not enough to where like they can like build this whole argument back. And then at that point, right, if they just continue on and you're like, okay, this is not just ignorance, this is bullying, right? We see that. Our response normally as a business or professionally is just to don't respond. We'll leave the comments up. I will leave them up because like other people will see it and other people can comment, which is often what happens, funny enough, right? Like people I don't even know will jump in and be like, hey, that was a good snatch, like good job, or like that person is being, you know what I mean? Like I let other people, right, do it. But yeah, give them a little bit of knowledge. Like there's plenty of ignorance. There's not enough knowledge. There's not enough patience. There's not enough coaching. So in that moment, even though that might not be my athlete who's obviously making the ignorant comment, I try to give him a little bit that might be helpful.
Yeah, and I think one of the beautiful things is kind of just looking at your approach as a whole is not only are you developing weightlifters, but you're teaching a lot of life skills, right? Having these discussions, having like a code of conduct, being very professional. It not only speaks to becoming better at weightlifting, but just becoming a better person. And I'm sure the discussions you have to have in those situations will influence the future interactions of that person and whoever they're coming into contact with. And I think that's something a lot of people miss, is how far this goes outside of the gym.
Yep. And I would agree too, especially if you coach, we have youth athletes, junior athletes, college age athletes, right? And we're starting a college team. Actually, we're in the process of it. Those are some of the most formative years. And not that I'm an old person, because I'm not. So if older people are listening to this, they're like, Jilly, you're not that old. But like, oh, but I am. I moved out at 16. So I think that's part of the reason why I grew up maybe a little faster and I had to figure it out, and why I was also a brat. I try to approach it, like I call it the sense of wonderment, right? Because a lot of times I'm not sure where these younger kids are coming from, or when they make that comment, even adults, right? Like you can react, or you can be like, let's approach this with a little bit of sense of wonder and find out where they're coming from. And then also show them how they're showing up for others, right? Like how they're showing up for their teammates, because how they're showing up for their teammates is also probably how they're showing up at their job. It's also probably how they're showing up at home. It's also probably how they're showing up in their relationships. And sometimes you have those conversations, right? And you're like, hey, you have this like very, like I have a sarcastic sense of humor, but it rarely comes out at the gym. Sometimes sarcasm isn't perceived well. And I'll bring it up. I'm like, hey, you're very sarcastic, and some people just don't get it. So like, instead of being sarcastic, like we can still make jokes. And I'm not saying don't be yourself, but like, maybe a little bit of context would be helpful for some of these individuals who took offense to those jokes. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I didn't even realize anyone took offense to my jokes. And I'm like, well, have you noticed that your teammates don't want to train with you recently? Or, hey, have you noticed that so-and-so has been kind of quiet around you? I'm like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, that's what taking offense looks like. And they're like, oh, well, I didn't know that. I just thought that, so-and-so was in a bad mood, or they think it's them, right? Like it's an awareness thing. And the more aware you are, and I think any coach or athlete will tell you, of not only who you are, but how you're showing up, the better weightlifter you will be, right? Because we can look internally too and say, hey, I'm in a really bad mood. And now it's putting all my teammates in a bad mood. And now my lifting is going shitty, right? And if we can be a little bit more aware and maybe take a step out of the room, or take the step out of the gym and then come back and be like, hey, I'm leaving it at the door, right? That's why we have that standard. And I'm turning my awareness on, and I'm going to focus on what I actually want to accomplish today. That's how we get better at weightlifting. It's not just snatching. It's not just pulling. It's not just cleaning. It's acknowledging we're human, right? And we have these emotions, and we need to condense them, put them in a box, deal with them later, or whatever we need to do to then refocus and continue working towards our goals. Because we see it a lot. I mean, I see it as a coach all the time. Any given day, you're going to have at least one athlete with a bad mood, one athlete with a bad day. And that, if every athlete has a bad day every single day, your culture starts turning real toxic real fast. So there has to be someone, not to even call them out on their shit, right? Because it's not shit, right? It's real and it's happening to them, and they think it's very real, but to refocus them and guide them so that we can move towards those big national performances and like refocus them on that end goal.
So this is a good, actually a good conversation we're having. I really like it. And I had a discussion with someone the other day, and we were talking about how much of personality influences how someone interacts with other people. So how do you parse out someone's personality versus just how they are from day to day, right? Because if someone has a personality that gravitates more towards negativity or more towards acting in a way that's not beneficial for the whole, like that's tough, because you don't want to leave that person out or not include them because they tend to be one way that you don't think is positively impactful. But at the same time, if it is affecting everyone else, it can't go without being approached.
I mean, I think that, and it takes a second, right, to step back and remember, right, that eventually culture does develop itself, correct? And for every person who thinks that they are right, and often when you're in an organization, a lot of you guys think the same way, right? There is always going to be someone else who does not think that way. And I think initially our first reaction is they're wrong, or they're negative, or that doesn't jive with what I believe and I think. And you have to ask yourself, are they challenging myself personally? Are they challenging the culture? Or are they truly, this is just not the place for them? Because, there's a really good book. It's called Dream Teams for anyone out there who is looking for a good read. And they will tell you that more often than not, having someone, okay, in an organization who comes in and maybe we're perceiving it as negative, right? But maybe they said something that ruffled some feathers, right? It got under our skin a little because it was true, right? Or they made a comment that made us rethink things. That will cause all the other people in the room to think that much harder to not only maybe defend their beliefs or justify it, or maybe reconsider what we actually think so that we can adjust as an organization and move forward. That person who might make people uncomfortable or challenge their way of thinking is not always negative, okay? And we don't want to be this homogeneous organization that's really culty, because that's not that does not promote growth, right? As a person or an organization. You have to evaluate first, are they saying this because they want to cause harm? Are they saying this because they like the challenge, right? They like that intellectual, it might be like as simple as, oh, I don't understand why we're doing snatch deadlifts to hip. Okay. And everybody else in the room is like, because coach said so. And then that athlete is like, well, I don't know. My old coach never wrote snatch deadlift to hip or blah, blah, blah. And so in that moment, you're like, are they being negative? Or are they actually raising a valid question? And I can explain as a coach why we're doing it, right? That person is then satisfied. Everyone in the room now knows why we're doing snatch deadlifts to hip. Everyone is more informed, and we move forward, right? That's very different. And you have to put your ego aside and actually be the coach in that role and ask yourself why it's coming up, because maybe you never explained to that athlete like the importance of that exercise for them, versus this programming is stupid. Okay, well, first of all, are they 5? Are they 16? Are they 26? Like, let's, again, perspective, right? Because, like, we coach all ages. But as far as, like, adults go, because I will hear, like, oh, this is stupid from, like, kids all the time. And that's just, they're kids. You can't take it too seriously. You can't take offense to it. You talk to the parents. You let the parents pretty much, like, handle that how they see fit if they're being negative, because, like, they're not 18, right? But if we're talking about an adult, that I think has happened maybe one time ever in my career. And I'm like, I would sit that down I wouldn't do it in front of their peers, right? I would take them off to the side and be like, hey, lots of people here really like the programming. I like the programming because I wrote it. I really believe in my programming. I think it's a really good programming. You're saying it's stupid. Are you saying it's stupid because you're having a bad day? Are you saying it's stupid because you're not seeing results? Like, where is the stupid coming from? Oh, well, I just was really pissed off because I missed that back squat. Okay, then we need to talk about how to manage our anger better, or how to manage our frustration better, right? Because it's not actually that my program is stupid and I'm not going to take offense to it because I know you're upset, but you have to understand that made everyone else really uncomfortable, and it made me feel like I wasn't doing a good job, right? And I don't like feeling like that. And if it happens again, we're probably going to decide to part ways, because I really like coming to work. I really like being around people who like to do their programming and they can manage their anger a little bit better. And so then they have a choice, right? Like, either they can step up and grow if we're talking about, like, that's just their personality and they're negative. And then if it happens again, they now know why they're being asked to leave or being asked to, like, part ways with the organization. You have them, like, you have to give people tangibles. It can't be just like, oh, I don't like you anymore, or, oh, you don't fit in here, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's important to clearly outline for people what is the actual problem, right? And first to ask, what is the actual problem? And so when dealing with difficult personality types, which often show up in weightlifting facilities, there are going to be lots of offhand comments. You have a lot of type A people. You have a lot of people who are very set in their ways. Most of the time, they've just got the blinders on and they need a gentle reminder that how they're showing up is not cool with the direction we're moving in as a team. And if it happens again, that's then the discussion. Hey, what do you want to do? Because this isn't working for myself or the team. And if you feel like it cannot be resolved, I mean, that's why we have a 3-month trial period. And then after that, we're month to month. And it's like, hey, like, we have a 3-month trial period. After that, we evaluate if it is the right fit for our gym. And then after that, I don't need contracts ever. So if it's month to month, at the end of the month, they're just gone, right? If I'm like, hey, it's not working out for us.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting from you, and maybe this is an accurate summary, is it's just not assuming that everything is common knowledge.
Oh yeah, nothing is common knowledge.
Because
Nothing.
when someone makes a remark like that, like the deadlift to the hip is stupid, and you think, well,
Right.
they know why we're doing it. They know what it's
Right.
useful for. It's not common knowledge.
No.
So maybe educating them will do enough to change their opinion on it or change
Yes.
their mind.
Yes. And even assuming, right, that they have the context to evaluate an exercise is wrong, or assuming that they know anything about exercise physiology or weightlifting in general is wrong, right? And if you assume, right, that they even know like different accessories to the hip or different pulls, and so they actually think your exercise choice is stupid, it literally could just be they had a bad day and that's it. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your program. It has nothing to do with your exercise selection whatsoever. Like assuming anything has to go out the door, because if we're assuming, we're not asking questions, we're not thinking intuitively, we're not connecting with people, and we're just forming our own story and our own version that oftentimes does not resolve the actual issue.
Yeah, and if you think of as a coach what has to go into your development, you spend years and years and years understanding weightlifting and then what precedes weightlifting, like the exercise physiology and biology and all of those things. There's this conglomerate of experience and education that no one else is going to have access to. And that's why they come to you. So you cannot make assumptions based off of your understanding because no one else has that. And that's why it's an expertise.
Exactly.
You're raising a lot of good points. It's allowing me to kind of question ways I do things, which is great. And that's why I bring people like yourself on, because you obviously have a lot of experience, a lot of time coaching, and it's already been an hour, and I have a lot of topics written down that, of course, we're not able to get to, which is great. I'd rather do that than have some outlined, regimented podcast episode. So I'll have to ask you to come back on soon, and we can kind of discuss what I wanted to touch on, which is training or competing at a meet with a lot of lifters. Obviously, that's different. Maybe even just how to get ready for a meet for novices.
We can do that.
Okay, great. And as far as like you talked about some people coming up to you, if they want to get in contact with you about your services, your coaching, your barbell club, any of that, where can they find you? TSSBarbell.com. We have a contact form is the absolute best way to get a hold of us. We have 5 different people who run that account. It is not always me, but that is how we were able to respond so quickly. So if someone does want to get a hold of me, I will see it and I will be able to get in touch with them as quickly as possible. And then the Instagram accounts for the Barbell Club and then for yourself?
It's at TSS Barbell. That is our gym page. And then at Jilly Jaworske is my personal page. And
then you kind of talked about things you're looking forward to doing, like starting that college team. So do you have any projects in the works or anything else that you'd like to share?
I do have a couple projects in the works. So yes, we are working on starting a University of Texas San Antonio weightlifting team. It will be co-ed, but we have all men who are starting it. So it'll be predominantly a men's team. We're taking a team in the university next year, which I'm very excited about. Back to Vegas, which I'm not so excited about. Vegas killed me. And Brittany and I are also working on kind of like a consulting project right now. There's a lot of education out there for athletes, right? There's a lot of different coaching protocols, coaching templates. There are not a lot of resources for coaches coaching coaches. And I think we have a lot of really great coaches in this country who have a lot of good knowledge to share beyond, no offense, Josh, beyond podcasts, but more formally, right? And I think one of our biggest gaps in weightlifting right now is we don't have a system for that level 1 coach or that level 2 coach to progress to the level 3 or level 4 level. So Brittany and I are working on actually forming a separate company so that we can connect those higher level coaches with our thousands of level 1 coaches and our hundreds of level 2 coaches so that we can close that gap a little bit, taking more of a grassroots initiative so we can continue to develop more talent right outside of our own gyms. Because if we can do work through other coaches, I mean, we're on our way to finding the next Harrison Morris, the next CJ Cummings. So that's kind of my passion project right now. It's very new. It's in the works, but beyond managing the team, we have like 2 meets coming up. So we host like 8 or 9 meets a year. I've got 2 more events for this year I'm running. Yeah, working on a little consulting project. So hopefully once that's up and running, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about it.
Yeah, and speaking to that, as a coach that's kind of trying to find my way,
Right.
it seems like a luck of the draw thing. It's like,
Totally.
who notices me? What athletes do I get that have this far reach?
Yep.
It's more so chance than it is skill. And
Yep.
I've noticed that a lot of, no offense, and I'm not going to say any names, but a lot of great coaches may have gotten there just because they worked with the right team or under the right coach, so they can
Yep.
use that to kind of prop themselves up. And then
Right.
I've talked to a lot of really knowledgeable people that are just, you would never know. You wouldn't know. And I think that's great to give them an opportunity. I think that's awesome.
I think that, leveling that field a little bit and closing the gap between the elite, right, and maybe the not so elite. I think you can learn from each other. I think those level 4 and 5 coaches, right, who are working with those level 1 coaches are going to be presented with problems that they don't really see anymore, right? And they're going to have to grow as level 4 and level 5 coaches, more so than beyond maintaining that certification and doing what they do. And I think a lot of our level 1 and level 2 coaches, right? We've got like almost 9,000 level 1 coaches, but we only have like 900 level 2 coaches and something like 300, right, level 3 coaches. I think a lot of them could really use some help making that transition to the national level. And it's only going to make us more efficient at running meets, have more volunteers, having more involvement at that national level. And it's time. Like, there's never been a better time to start closing that gap. And since I'm very passionate about coaching in general, I was like, coaching coaches is just like so fun because I'm at a point where I really don't want to take on a whole bunch more athletes. Like, we're already at 80, and 80 is a really great number. But like 100 right now sounds like a lot, right? Like, I need to start developing more coaches, which is why we have interns. That's kind of where the idea arose from, like I'm beyond the point where I'm like, yeah, I want more athletes. Like, no, like I want more coaches who can coach in these other locations where I maybe have remote athletes, so that they can start their own clubs and we can continue to move forward, right? Like, as a sport.
Yeah, and I think what's opened my eyes to it is someone was talking to me the other day about stipends. And
Yeah.
I had that kind of myopic view of coaching as programming and technique and then competition coaching. And you don't really get a grasp of what goes into it. Organizing an athlete's life basically in terms of how much money they can get from USA Weightlifting, travel costs, lodging, and everything else. There's tons I would be missing out if I tried to list it all. So
Totally.
that's really cool. And without dragging this on even further, I do want to thank you again for coming on. I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate it, and will probably be reaching out to just chat, I guess.
Yeah.
Or at least I hope they do, because
Yes, it was a lot of fun. This was a fun one.
yeah, and I'll email you and we can get something scheduled for the next one.
Awesome.
But until then, thank you guys for listening. If you like the podcast, like, share, subscribe, leave a review. Even if it's not a good review, I appreciate it. Any criticism is appreciated. So thanks, guys, and we'll catch you next time.